He called me old school right in front of the whole strategy team, then gave me that smug grin like he'd just discovered fire. After that, he started walking everyone through my compliance schema, using a LinkedIn flowchart he clearly didn't understand. I didn't even bother correcting him. Just sat there sipping the same terrible breakroom coffee I've been drinking for 19 years, listening to Lucas, fresh out of whatever overpriced MBA factory the CFO paid for. Call my audit flags paranoid bottlenecks. That was my first real clue. This wasn't about making things better. This was about erasing what came before. People love to mistake quiet for weakness. They assume if you've been around long enough, you're too worn out to fight back. That's why execs love their legacy employees. Until we remind them that the systems they're bragging about, we're the ones who built them. Lucas didn't even know the difference between a risk log and an access protocol. The guy thought segregation of duties had something to do with seating charts. And yet somehow, this walking billboard for nepotism ended up as Director of Operational Efficiency - No interviews. No real background. Just a recycled TED Talk voice and a last name that made HR stand up straighter like we were suddenly back in 1954. Before Lucas, my days were simple. No drama. Logs clean. Pipelines running smooth. No outages. I trained every intern they sent my way. I even helped 3 former CFOs turn their clueless kids into halfway decent junior analysts. 2 of them still send me holiday cards. But Lucas came in swinging. Didn't bother learning the layout before he started cutting. Deleted redundancy tags I'd carefully placed after a close call with the SEC back in 2018. I asked calmly if he wanted to review the audit history before making any changes. He waved me off and said, "It's called Agile, Mason. Maybe Google it." That's when I realized this wasn't a restructure. This was a purge. And hey, if you're still listening, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It actually helps way more than you'd think. 97% of people watch without subscribing. But this one's gonna stick. Trust me. Anyway, back to Lucas. Second week on the job, he pushes out an internal memo to kill a tool I'd built after the FinCorp breach. A tool that cross-checked external vendor changes with our internal payroll records. His reasoning? It clutters the dashboard. I set up a one-on-one. He skipped it. Twice. Then he shot me a Slack message. Just trim the fat and get with the program. No hello. No sign-off. Just that. So I flagged the risk. Documented every single change. Quietly forwarded it all to internal review. Next morning, I get called into a Zoom with the CFO. Full company-wide call. 117 people. Cameras on. The CFO smiled, but not the kind of smile that says you're in the clear. He said I disrupted the momentum of a promising new leader and demanded I issue a public apology to Lucas for creating a culture of fear and inflexibility. I didn't blink. Just unmuted and said, "Okay." That was it. Silence. But silence has always been my best language. And when I said okay, I wasn't surrendering. I was planning. Lucas didn't even check the file names before tossing them in the trash. Just labeled them legacy bloat and deleted 6 cross-verification nodes I personally built after our last SEC compliance scare. One of those nodes was a multi-factor check on disbursements that caught 2 fake vendor payments back in 2020. But to Lucas, if it wasn't in his color-coded Excel sheet from week 1, it didn't exist. He actually called anything older than 5 years archaeological debt - I'm serious. Archaeological - Like years of institutional knowledge were just some fossil he needed to sweep out of the way, so his daddy could show off a lean tech transformation at the next investor call. I sent Lucas a polite message. Flagged a vulnerability his changes had exposed, one that would let duplicate contractor IDs slip past our invoice limits. I even included screenshots and a before and after flow diagram. 3 hours later, he replied with a single sentence. Appreciate the heads up. Let's stay solution-oriented. That's rich, coming from a guy who thought a sandbox environment was some kind of browser extension he needed to install. I escalated the issue quietly, through the secure back channel I'd helped the compliance team set up years ago. This wasn't about making Lucas look bad. I wasn't trying to win points. I was trying to protect the company. You'd think a $600 million corporation would care about the safeguards keeping it out of federal court. But nope. What they cared about was rank. And Lucas's last name? That one sat right at the top of the food chain. Once the CFO caught wind of my escalation, he didn't ask for details, didn't call a meeting, didn't even bother to review the flagged vulnerabilities, the duplicate entries, or the very real liability. Instead, he scheduled another all-hands Zoom. Cameras on. Lucas sat there glowing like he'd just been crowned spelling bee champ. "Mason," the CFO said, leaning forward into his webcam like he was about to deliver a eulogy, "we've received reports that you're creating internal friction, that your methods are obstructive. My son is trying to innovate, and you're clinging to outdated systems." I didn't say a word. "Effective immediately," he continued. "You're off the operational pipeline, unless you're willing to issue a public apology for questioning leadership." A few people blinked. One person actually gasped. Most just stared at their keyboards, pretending not to hear the hostage negotiation playing out live. Lucas didn't say anything, just gave that little half-smirk, like someone who's never had to earn authority, just inherited it like a lake house that comes with the family name. I unmuted and said, "Understood." Then I logged off. No rebuttal. No speech. No grandstand moment. Because real power doesn't always come with a roar. Sometimes it waits, quiet, measured, surgical, just long enough for everyone to forget where it actually came from. I stared at the blinking cursor in the resignation letter template. But I didn't type a thing. Not yet. I just sat there in the cold blue light of the monitor, letting the silence settle like dust in a server rack. My hands were steady. No anger. No fear. Just that icy focus that hits when someone mistakes your quiet for surrender, one time too many. That Zoom call? That wasn't punishment. That was permission. I opened the encrypted drive I hadn't touched in years. Buried in there were digital footprints of a version of me everyone had long forgotten. The younger Mason back when they called me a consultant, not a legacy asset. That was my actual title on the original contract. Dated 2004. I was the original systems architect before the acquisition, before the rebrand, before the revolving door of execs showed up pretending this place hadn't existed before their LinkedIn profiles. I found the clause I remembered writing myself, because I didn't trust anyone's handshake back then. Clause 7C. In the event of forced project removal without due process or cause, contractor retains exclusive rights to derivative software modules created independently during original system design, including but not limited to legacy audit frameworks, vendor compliance protocols, and attached reporting dashboards. In plain English, if they pushed me out without cause, I still owned the bones. And here's the kicker, they never updated it. Not once. Not in 19 years. So I started building my exit the same way I built everything else around here. Quiet. Precise. No loose threads. I logged into the admin console. Merlin. Not the shiny facelift Lucas had slapped on for investor optics. I expired 3 keys tied to internal sync licenses. Didn't revoke them. Just let them quietly expire. No alerts yet. No red flags. Just a graceful fade out. I printed my resignation letter and left the bottom blank, for something I wasn't ready to write. Not yet. Then I opened another file. My checklist. Not a to-do list. A kill switch catalog. Every asset. Every platform. Every vendor contract where my name, or my LLC, was listed. Rich South Systems, my original consulting firm. Technically, I never shut it down. Just let it go dormant. Until now. First move. Revoke the license handshake for the audit dashboard. Second. Disable the backup sync that fed into Lucas's shiny investor-ready dashboard, the one he kept bragging about at every Thursday stand-up. Third. Prep the archival encryption logs for legal. On the surface, it looked like a routine cleanup, just your average system maintenance. But anyone with half a clue would have noticed what was gone. I encrypted the logout timers, labeled them as session rotation maintenance, and set them to cascade, one system every 12 hours. Just slow enough to avoid raising alarms, but fast enough to be irreversible once the wheels were in motion. Then I reached under my desk and pulled out a thumb drive that had been sitting in a dummy USB port since 2015. Inside it, the last working copy of the compliance shadow logs. No cloud backups. No mirrors. No digital breadcrumbs. Just mine. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't rebellion. It was insurance. Because if they were gonna throw me out of the house I built, I sure as hell wasn't letting them keep the foundation. The first system to hiccup was the investor portal. Just a soft timeout at first, nothing dramatic. Probably looked like a minor glitch. Lucas probably chalked it up to a lapsed token or blamed some faceless IT contractor halfway across the world before he even thought to check the logs. But if he had checked, he would have seen the message. License ping returned new inactive handshake. That handshake used to run on autopilot until I turned it off. Then his prize dashboard, the one he named Apollo Metrics like he'd launched it into orbit himself, started to flicker. Blank tiles. Frozen load screens. He'd hard-coded that thing to pull data from a live view table buried behind a secondary firewall I designed. That firewall filtered out test entries, ghost vendors, placeholder shells, basically all the digital trash. Without my access key, the system saw nothing. And Lucas? He saw a blank white screen where his shiny investor-ready metrics were supposed to be. Still, no alarms went off. Nobody suspected sabotage. That's the beauty of a quiet exit. Everyone's so caught up in their next meeting, they don't notice what's gone until the lights shut off. Legal finally caught a whiff when a vendor renewal flagged for review. Name on the contract? Rich South Systems LLC. My consulting company. My original identity, pre-merger, never officially dissolved. Just left to gather dust. Some clerk in procurement forwarded it to legal with a red alert tag. I imagined a junior associate sitting there, squinting at the metadata, wondering how this dormant shell company suddenly triggered a license conflict. They'd figure it out. Eventually. But by then, the dominoes would already be down. I walked into HR with my resignation folded crisp, badge clipped to the top, slid it across the front desk like it was just another form. The receptionist gave me that too bright smile. "Oh, are you transferring to a new department?" I didn't explain, just nodded and said, "Appreciate your time," before turning and walking out, before the glass doors could even swing shut behind me. She didn't open the letter. Wouldn't have understood the last page anyway. The part outlining the summary of derivative rights, and the timestamp for my final login triggers. Outside it was drizzling. Not a downpour, but enough to feel like something in the air had shifted. Subtle. Like a warning. Back inside I knew they were scrambling. But not for the reasons they should have been. Lucas was probably spinning some excuse about AWS latency. Legal was tossing around phrases like legacy exposure. And the CFO? He was likely prepping some damage control pitch for the quarterly call, bragging about internal streamlining, without realizing the cracks in the foundation were already spreading under his feet. This was the phase no one sees. The part where things don't break, they just stop lining up. Quiet shifts. Subtle misfires. Enough of them, and even the flashiest operation starts to unravel. Then came Monday. Lucas walked in like he'd just saved the world. Aviators hooked to his collar. Protein shake in hand, fake tan practically glowing under the office fluorescence. He flashed finger guns at the receptionist, who looked like she was trying to melt into the ficus, then strutted down the hall like a dog that slipped the leash. That was his mistake. He thought silence meant he'd won. He reached my row. Slowed down. Stopped. Looked at my desk, really looked. No coffee cup. No post-it wall. No half-worn wrist brace I usually kept near the keyboard. Just the dull, empty desk of someone who hadn't just quit. Someone who'd left with intent. "I see you learned your lesson, huh?" Lucas mumbled to the empty chair, trying to save face in front of the junior analyst nearby. She blinked at him, confused, then quickly went back to pretending her screen wasn't frozen. Across the building, in a quiet room with blackout blinds and 4 standing desks, people were starting to twitch. An alert had gone off at 7:43 a.m. Unauthorized credentials detected. License key invalid. Usually, something like that would be a low-level panic. Someone mistyped a password. A vendor updated their access token. But this one hit the core reporting engine. And it didn't just fail, it returned null. No record. No fallback. No shadow. The system didn't reject the login. It simply didn't understand what login was anymore. At 8:12 a.m., a level 3 support engineer messaged his team lead. "Weird thing. Rich South Systems is showing up as the vendor owner for CF Pipeline off. Isn't that Mason's?" By 8:17 a.m., Legal Slack thread jumped from idle to DEFCON 2. A paralegal dropped a screenshot into the channel. A contract flagged for review that hadn't been touched since 2009. One line highlighted: system continuity rights to remain property of Ridge South Systems unless advisory contract terminated under Section 14b3. No corporate signature. No amendment. Just my initials, a date, and a still valid digital hash. At 8:23 a.m., the CFO's Slack lit up. Melissa, our Corp Legal Darren CFO. Are you aware Mason Drake is still listed as the primary licensor for the core financial system? I need confirmation ASAP. This affects investor access. He didn't respond, because right then Lucas was sitting at his desk, refreshing his dashboard over and over, watching every graph he'd promised to investors load as white boxes and red question marks. Smugness is a fragile currency. One rough morning, one missing data feed, one overlooked contract clause, and suddenly you're not the future of the company. You're just the guy who cracked the pipes trying to remodel the kitchen. He probably thought I was bluffing. Figured I'd come crawling back with a sheepish grin and a scripted apology. But here's the thing about assuming silence equals surrender. Sometimes it's just the sound of the trap closing. By 9:03 a.m., half the pre-board packets had failed validation. Every export button spit out a cheery little 502 error. Please try again later. But there was no later. Those decks were supposed to go live by noon. And without them, investor alignment shattered like a cheap espresso cup hitting tile. Lucas had stopped smiling. The head of finance was pacing. Their junior analyst, God bless her, was frantically trying to paste screen grabs into a last-minute PowerPoint. But the graphs weren't just broken. They were gone. The datasets behind them were sealed, locked behind access paths that no longer belonged to them. At 9:26, Melissa from Legal shoved open the CFO's glass door without even knocking. Darren didn't look up. He was staring at an empty Slack message, fingers hovering like he was hoping the apology would write itself. "Did you fire Mason publicly?" she asked, breathless, holding 3 stapled pages covered in neon flags. He blinked. "What? Did you publicly fire him?" she said again, slower now. "On record. During a full staff call." He leaned back. "I told him to apologize or step down, and he said, okay." Melissa stared at him like he'd just confessed to setting the place on fire. "Oh my God," she whispered. Then louder, "You can't do that. Not with his contract. Not with that clause still active." She slapped the pages down in front of him. "Clause 7C, she said, jabbing the highlighted paragraph. He retains software derivative rights and conditional IP licenses tied to advisory status. If he's removed without cause or process, he owns the tools, the dashboards, the audit shells, the archival maps. It's not company property, it's his intellectual property. We've been licensing all of it through Ridge South under active advisory terms. And you just cut that tie." The CFO went pale. "That was 20 years ago. That can't still." Melissa cut him off. "It was renewed in 2018. We filed an extension when we entered compliance phase 2. Mason signed it. No executive countersignature. That means it defaulted to his terms." "But he's just a contractor," Darren tried. "He was a co-architect," she snapped. "And now? He's a hostile vendor." By 10:04 a.m., 4 investors had already requested their final packets. None of them could access the files. The system kept redirecting them to a deactivated license page. Right at the top, a banner read, "Contact Ridge South Systems for authorization." That was me. That banner used to say "Powered by Dash." I changed it over the weekend. Lucas had locked himself inside a huddle room. I pictured him frantically Googling how to file an emergency vendor override. But there wasn't one. Not for this. Not for a system built line by line from scratch by someone who didn't believe in handing over keys to people who never even bothered to read the map. What they called outdated. That was leverage. And now they were watching it vanish. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. sharp. Every executive cleared their calendars. No agenda. No prep decks. Just a subject line from the chairman's office. Compliance exposure. Immediate review required. The first slide wasn't a graph. It was a black screen with a single line in red text. Q3 audit trail file not found. That's when the whispers started. Turns out Lucas's efficiency overhaul wasn't just cosmetic. In his rush to make things look sleeker, he'd wiped out the only copy of the Q3 compliance log tree, the same one I warned him not to touch. No backups, no versioning, no cloud failsafe, just one big flashy dashboard wrapper that looked great, until you tried to dig beneath it and found absolutely nothing. And the worst part? That audit trail wasn't optional. It was a federal requirement. 2 of our contracts depended on it. Its absence alone was enough to trigger an investigation. And they couldn't fake it now. Not with timestamp gaps already crawling through the metadata like rot. Someone asked if it could be recovered. Legal gave a one-line response. Mason Drake was the sole custodian of the encrypted archive. Silence. That's when panic turned into something heavier. Dread. Realization. The shift from denial to damage control. I wasn't just the guy who left. I was the only person alive who knew where the audit skeletons were buried and how to dig them up the right way. At 11:12 a.m. my phone buzzed. It wasn't the CFO. Wasn't legal. It was a private email from Emily, the CEO's assistant. Someone I'd worked with 1,000 times in quiet behind-the-scenes ways. We used to trade sticky notes between compliance and legal before Slack killed all that. Subject: read today. Body: Mason, hope you're well. I know things have escalated. Would you be open to a conversation? No agenda. Just a chance to talk. Emily. I didn't answer right away. I just sat at the kitchen table, watching the morning light shift across the surface of my laptop, thinking about how many of them were just now realizing something I'd known all along. Redundant doesn't mean replaceable. I wasn't an employee anymore. I wasn't even a contractor. I was a liability, a firewall, a single point of failure they'd never thought to document because they assumed they'd never need to. But now they had no choice. The leverage didn't come from anger. It didn't come from threats. It came from being the last person who still knew how it all actually worked. And that made me irreplaceable. I never went back. Not to the building. Not to the badge scanner. Not even to the parking garage with the oil stain I always parked over to hide the slow leak in my car. Let them keep their glass cubicles and their kombucha taps. I wasn't looking for a victory lap. I wasn't angry. I was just done. There's a difference. A week after the board meeting, Rich South Systems quietly reappeared on the active vendor retainer list. No announcement. No all-hands email. Just a new line item buried in the procurement system. Ongoing compliance systems consultation. Advisory level access. The dollar amount listed? More than I'd ever made on salary. But I didn't cash the check. Not yet. As for Lucas, he'd been transitioned into a new role in strategic development. No direct reports. No meetings. No platform access. Just a hollow title and an office with a dead landline. Someone told me he spent his first day of exile working on a pitch for a blockchain initiative absolutely no one had asked for. HR sent out a memo later that week. It read like a forced grin. We are proud to announce a comprehensive legacy system ownership review spearheaded by cross-functional teams committed to transparency and sustainability. Translation: they were scrambling to figure out what else I still legally owned. They'd finally pulled the old contracts from the archive. Started reading them. Not just mine, everyone's. Because I wasn't the only one who'd slipped in little clauses back in the Wild West days. I was just the first one who enforced one that actually had teeth. Late Thursday evening my phone rang. Unknown number. 212 area code. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. A woman's voice. Calm. Clear. Mr. Drake, I represent one of the parent investment funds tied to your former employer. We've reviewed your dashboards. They were elegant. Simple. Future-proof. We'd like to speak with you about consulting opportunities, if you're open to it. She didn't say which fund she worked for. She didn't have to. People like her don't reach out unless the decision's already been made in a room you're not sitting in. I leaned back and let it settle in. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just the low, steady hum of balance being restored. They didn't want me back because they missed me. They wanted me because they finally realized I wasn't ornamental. I was essential. I didn't sabotage them. I didn't leak files. Didn't whistleblow. I just reclaimed what was mine and turned out the lights on the way out. Let them stumble around in the dark a bit. Turns out, it's hard to rebuild a foundation when no one remembers who poured the concrete. The dashboard faded out with a soft blink. No error message. No alert. Just a clean, quiet session closed. Like a curtain falling after the final act. I sat at the kitchen table, cradling the same chipped coffee mug I'd used since the merger. The coffee inside had gone cold, but I didn't care. There was something strangely peaceful about watching the last piece of that world disappear without a sound. Not with rage. Not with applause. Just closure. The logs were gone. The handshakes. The license keys. Even the old compliance prompts unlinked, archived, dusted. No more calls at midnight about vendor anomalies. No more pinging interns 2 time zones away about a forgotten password. That life, with all its artificial urgency and inflated egos, had finally spun out of my orbit. I reached under the table and pulled out a sealed folder. My handwriting on the label, post-contract audit keys. Inside were the final offline authorizations, codes that could still unlock residual shadow logs and encrypted backups. My last bit of insurance, in case they ever got desperate enough to beg, and foolish enough to lie. I fed the pages into the cast iron fireplace. No drama, no speeches, just the quiet crackle of paper curling, darkening, and disappearing into smoke. The fire didn't roar. It whispered, like it understood. My laptop chimed again. One last message in the thread I'd left open earlier. From Emily, CEO's office. Subject, read today. Message. He didn't read the clause, did he? I smiled. Barely. He hadn't. None of them had. For 19 years they skimmed contracts, assumed loyalty, and tossed around words like vendor like it meant replaceable. But some vendors, they don't wear name tags. Some of us build the vault and memorize every exit long before anyone else even moves in. I closed the laptop, slid it to the far side of the table, and stared out the window. The world outside looked the same as always. Same street, same sky, same rhythm. But everything had changed. They thought cutting me loose would make things easier. What they didn't realize was I was the simplification. Some lessons don't come with apologies.